Samuel Running Wolf stood at the edge of the village, his weathered face stoic as the tribal council delivered their verdict. 62 years of loyal service to the tribe meant nothing now. One mistake, challenging the sacred hunting grounds boundary, and he was cast out. The old warrior had never known a woman's kiss, dedicating his life, instead, to tribal protection. Now he faced the barren mountains alone, with only memories and regrets for company. As he climbed higher into the misty peaks, something caught his eye: smoke from a chimney where no cabin should be. Inside lived Irene, a woman with secrets as deep as the canyons surrounding them. Could an outcast who never knew love find it in the place of his punishment? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Samuel Running Wolf's joints ached as he climbed the steep mountain path. 62 years of harsh winters had carved deep lines into his copper face like the canyons below. He paused, lungs burning, and reached for the bone whistle hanging around his neck, a reflex from decades as tribal sentinel. His fingers traced the worn carvings before dropping away. There was no one to signal now. The morning sun cast his shadow long against the rocks as memories washed over him. As a boy of 12, he'd shown remarkable skill with bow and knife, earning rare praise from the stoic elders. His father, Stonehawk, had been the tribe's protector before him, a position of honor requiring absolute dedication to the people. A guardian stands between his people and all dangers, his father had told him. He has no wife, no children. The tribe is his family, their safety his only concern. Samuel had nodded solemnly, accepting this path without question. When fever took his father 2 winters later, the mantle passed to him too young, but there was no other choice. The ceremony remained vivid in his mind: the sacred fire, the blessing of weapons, and the vow of celibacy that would define his existence. "I give myself to the people," he had declared, voice breaking with youth. "My eyes will watch, my arms will defend. My heart belongs to the Apache." For 50 years he had honored that vow. While others celebrated marriages and birthed children, he had walked the boundaries alone. He had guided hunting parties to bountiful grounds and tracked enemies who threatened their lands. His skill had become legend among neighboring tribes, who spoke of the solitary Apache whose arrows never missed. Yet something had changed in recent years. The young chief, Eagle Strike, had brought new ways. Traditions that had served the Apache for generations were questioned, then abandoned. Samuel had watched silently, respecting the chief's authority while mourning what was lost, until the council declared the northern hunting grounds forbidden. "Those mountains have fed us through harsh winters since our grandfather's time," Samuel had argued, breaking his customary silence. "The game is plentiful there. The northern tribes have claimed those lands," Eagle Strike had responded. "We will not risk war. They make this claim with no right. Our ancestors' blood is in that soil." The council chamber had fallen silent, shocked by his outburst. Samuel had never challenged authority until that moment when he saw hunger in children's eyes and remembered the plenty that awaited in the forbidden territory. What followed was his greatest shame. Under cover of darkness, he had led 3 young hunters north, determined to prove the bounty still belonged to them. They had returned with meat enough for a week's feasting, but a northern scout had spotted them. By morning, war drums echoed across the valley. Eagle Strike had faced him with cold fury. "You have endangered everything we have built. The peace treaties, the trading routes." Samuel had stood tall despite the weight crushing his chest. "Our children were hungry, and now they may be orphaned by the war you've invited," the chief had replied. "The council has decided. You are banished from the tribe." Now 3 days into exile, Samuel touched the whistle again. One blow would carry for miles, perhaps reach the village below. But what message would he send? That an old man regretted his pride, that loneliness already gnawed at his belly worse than any hunger. He let the whistle fall back against his chest and continued upward. Ahead, the mountain peak disappeared into clouds like the gateway to the spirit world. Perhaps that was his destination now, a place between earth and sky where old warriors went to die. As dusk approached, Samuel spotted a rocky overhang suitable for shelter. The temperature would drop dangerously after sunset. He gathered wood for a small fire, his movements efficient, despite his age. The flames cast dancing shadows as he chewed, dried meat from his dwindling supplies. Tomorrow he would hunt, though game would be scarce at this elevation. Water, at least, was plentiful from mountain streams. He could survive here until winter. Then what? The mountain peaks were no place for an old man when snow buried the world. Samuel closed his eyes, listening to the unfamiliar night sounds. No children's laughs, no songs around the communal fire. Just wind whispering secrets through ancient pines. For the first time since boyhood, Samuel Running Wolf wept. Dawn broke over the eastern ridge, painting the sky in bands of orange and purple. Samuel woke instantly, a lifetime of vigilance embedded in his body. He had slept poorly. Dreams filled with faces of those he'd left behind. Children who would grow without his teachings, elders who had turned their backs. His stomach growled. 4 days since banishment, and his provisions were nearly gone. The mountains offered little game at this elevation. He'd need to descend to the forested slopes where deer and elk might browse. Moving carefully to avoid straining his stiff knee, he packed his meager belongings and extinguished all traces of his fire. The path downward was treacherous, loose shale sliding beneath his moccasins. Samuel tested each step, knowing a broken leg would mean certain death this far from help. By midday he'd reached a small plateau with a stream cutting through granite. Fish darted in the clear water. His first opportunity for food. With practiced patience, Samuel fashioned a crude spear from a branch and waited by the water's edge, still as the rocks around him. When a trout ventured too close, his hand moved with surprising speed for a man his age. The fish would provide 1 meal, perhaps 2 if he was frugal. After eating, Samuel continued his descent, scanning the landscape for suitable shelter. The afternoon sun beat against his back as clouds gathered to the west, a storm approaching. He would need better protection than the previous night's overhang. The mountainside had been burned some seasons past, leaving blackened trunks standing like accusing fingers against the sky. At the burn's edge stood a massive pine, split by lightning but still partially alive. Its exposed roots created a natural cavity, large enough for a man to shelter if the rain came. As Samuel cleared debris from this potential refuge, something glinted among the roots. He brushed away soil to reveal a round metal object, unlike anything from his village. Its face was marked with strange symbols and contained a needle that moved when he turned it. The object seemed to indicate direction north, south, east, west, but with peculiar markings he couldn't decipher. "White man's magic," Samuel muttered, turning the object in his weathered hand. He had traded with settlers over the years and recognized this as something of value, though its exact purpose remained mysterious. Someone had been here before him, someone educated in ways different from Apache wisdom. Samuel tucked the compass into his medicine pouch. Objects abandoned in sacred places often carried power for good or ill. The storm arrived with sudden fury, forcing Samuel deep into the root shelter. Rain lashed the mountainside, transforming trickling streams into roaring torrents within minutes. Lightning split the sky, followed by thunder that shook the ground beneath him. In the village, children would be gathering around central fires, elders telling stories to distract from the storm's rage. Here there were only the elemental sounds of water, wind and stone. The downpour continued through evening and into night. Samuel dozed fitfully, one part of his mind always alert for dangers, flash floods, predators seeking the same shelter, loose rocks from above. When dawn finally broke, the world had transformed. Waterfalls appeared where none had existed before, and the air smelled of wet earth and pine. Samuel emerged, stretching his cramped muscles. The storm had cleared the air, making distant features sharp and vivid. From this vantage point, he could see far to the north, and something caught his eye. A thin column of smoke, almost invisible against the grey morning sky. He blinked, certain his eyes deceived him. These mountains were supposed to be uninhabited. The northern tribes rarely ventured this far south, and his people considered these peaks the dwelling place of spirits, not humans. Yet the smoke remained perhaps 2 days' journey away. Samuel considered his options. His survival chances alone were uncertain at best. Winter would come early to these heights, and he had no proper shelter, no stored food. The smoke might indicate enemies or potential allies. Either presented risk, but also possibility. Decision made, he gathered his few possessions. The strange directional device would help him maintain course through the valleys and ridges, between him and the mysterious smoke. Samuel touched the bone whistle at his neck one last time, a silent farewell to his former life, then set his face northward. Behind him a raven called 3 times, an omen his people considered significant. Whether it foretold death or transformation remained to be seen. 2 days of difficult travel brought Samuel to a narrow valley tucked between towering peaks. The smoke he'd spotted now rose more distinctly, emanating from somewhere ahead. He moved with the caution of a lifetime spent as hunter and scout, using pine clusters and boulder formations for cover. A game trail wound through the valley floor, showing recent use, not by animals alone. Samuel knelt to examine faint footprints pressed into mud near a stream crossing. Too small for a man, too purposeful for a wandering child. The steps had a strange gait, as if the person favored one leg slightly. A woman, he murmured, measuring the print against his palm. The revelation unsettled him. Women rarely traveled these mountains alone. She must be desperate or dangerous, perhaps both. Samuel continued forward with heightened vigilance, one hand resting on his knife. The valley narrowed further, becoming a corridor of stone, with aspen groves shimmering golden in the autumn light. Above him a raven circled 3 times before flying ahead, the same bird that had marked his departure. He was following its path. Samuel noticed something unusual catching the sunlight. Suspended from a tree branch at eye level, hung a small silver object on a broken chain. Samuel approached carefully, alert for traps. The object was clearly placed to be found, not accidentally lost. He reached out and took it, turning it over in his calloused fingers. A locket, tarnished with age, but finely crafted. Such things belonged to white women of means, not to anyone who should be in these mountains. With careful pressure, the catch released, revealing a small portrait within. A young woman with dark eyes and a serious expression gazed back at him, her hair styled in a manner he'd seen among educated settlers. Something about her seemed familiar, though he couldn't place why. Samuel closed the locket and scanned his surroundings with renewed wariness. This was a message, or a warning. Someone knew he was approaching, and wanted him aware of their presence. The deliberate placement suggested confidence, not fear. He tucked the locket into his pouch and continued forward, moving more deliberately now, reading the landscape for signs of habitation. The valley floor rose gradually, the stream beside it cascading in small waterfalls over rock shelves. Pine trees thickened, providing better cover for him, and for whoever watched. Near midday, Samuel caught his first glimpse of the cabin through a break in the trees. It stood in a small clearing, constructed of heavy logs, with a stone chimney from which the thin smoke rose. A split-rail fence enclosed a modest garden plot, where late-season vegetables still grew. Everything about the small homestead spoke of careful planning and solitary sufficiency. Samuel settled behind a fallen log with clear sightlines to the cabin. For hours, he watched patiently, noting details. Water came from a diverted stream rather than a well. Firewood was stacked precisely against the northern wall. A small lean-to sheltered what appeared to be drying herbs and animal pelts. Movement at the door finally rewarded his patience. A figure emerged, a woman, tall and straight-backed, despite apparent age. Her clothing was an unusual combination, a practical frontier skirt paired with what looked like a man's shirt and vest. Her gray-streaked hair was braided and wrapped at the nape of her neck. Most striking was her composure. She moved with purpose and awareness, scanning the tray line methodically as she went about her tasks. This was no ordinary settler woman. Her movements reminded Samuel of his own people, always conscious of being observed, always ready for threat or opportunity. The woman worked in her garden, harvesting late squash and beans with practiced efficiency. Occasionally she would pause, head tilting as if listening. Twice she looked directly toward Samuel's position, though he was certain he'd remained undetectable. As evening approached, the woman gathered her harvest in a rough basket and returned to the cabin. Smoke thickened from the chimney, and warm light soon glowed through a small window covered with oiled paper rather than glass. Samuel weighed his options. Making contact presented unknowable risk. Continuing alone into winter certainly meant death. The mysterious woman clearly had survived here, perhaps for years, suggesting knowledge that might mean the difference between life and death in these mountains. Night fell completely, stars emerging like scattered embers above the peaks. The temperature dropped rapidly, biting through Samuel's inadequate clothing. A decision was necessary. Testing each step for silence, Samuel approached the cabin's single window, drawn by the promise of warmth as much as curiosity. Through a small tear in the paper covering, he glimpsed the interior, simple furnishings, organized supplies, and the woman seated by the fire, her hands working steadily at some small task. The locket from the trail lay open on a table beside her. Samuel's breath fogged the torn paper window covering. A floorboard creaked inside the cabin. When he looked again, the woman was gone from her seat by the fire. The sudden silence stretched his nerves taut. "I know you're there." Her voice came clearly through the cabin wall, startling him with its directness. "I've known since yesterday." Samuel stilled his breathing, weighing retreat against confrontation. Before he could decide, the cabin door opened, casting a rectangle of warm light into the darkness. The woman stood framed in the doorway, a rifle held casually but competently in her hands. "Apache," she said, not a question, but an identification. "Come into the light where I can see you properly." Samuel stepped forward with dignity, hands visible at his sides. Up close, the woman was older than he'd first thought, perhaps 50 or more, with deep lines etched around her eyes and mouth. Those eyes studied him with intelligent assessment, missing nothing. "You're alone," she observed, "and not dressed for these mountains in autumn." Samuel nodded once, offering nothing. "Do you speak English?" she asked. "Enough," Samuel replied, his accent thick, but words clear. "I seek no trouble." The woman's mouth tightened. "Yet trouble seems to have found you." She glanced at the darkening sky, then at his inadequate clothing. "Night temperatures drop below freezing. You'll die out here without proper shelter." Samuel met her gaze steadily. "I have survived worse." "Perhaps, but not tonight with that wound festering." Samuel glanced down, surprised. The gash on his arm, from a fall 2 days earlier, was hidden beneath his buckskin shirt, yet somehow she knew of it. His silence acknowledged her observation. The woman sighed, a sound of resignation rather than fear. "Come inside. I have no interest in finding your frozen body near my home when snow melts in spring." She stepped back, keeping the rifle ready, but not aimed directly at him. Samuel hesitated only briefly before crossing the threshold into the first proper shelter he'd seen since leaving his village. The cabin's interior was spare, but organized with ruthless efficiency. Dried herbs hung from ceiling beams, their medicinal scents mingling with wood smoke. One wall held shelves of labeled jars and tins, another displayed well-maintained tools. A narrow bed occupied one corner, a writing desk another. The center was dominated by a stone hearth, where flames danced beneath a large iron cooking pot. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to a wooden chair near the fire. "Show me your arm." Pride warred with practicality in Samuel's mind. Among his people, allowing a stranger, especially a woman, to tend wounds would show weakness. Yet infection in these mountains meant certain death. With deliberate movements he removed his shirt, revealing the angry red gash that ran from elbow to shoulder. The wound's edges had turned an alarming shade of green. The woman made a clicking sound with her tongue. Without another word, she set down her rifle and moved to a shelf, selecting several jars. "You're fortunate," Another day and gangrene would have taken the arm, if not your life. She worked with clinical efficiency, cleaning the wound with a sharp-smelling liquid that burned like fire, then applying a poultice of crushed herbs. Her fingers were strong and sure, her touch impersonal yet somehow gentle. "I am called Samuel Running Wolf," he offered, breaking the silence. She glanced up, surprise flickering across her features at his voluntary introduction. "Irene," she replied after a moment. "Irene Blackwood." The name felt strange on his ears, neither fully white nor anything recognizable from neighboring tribes. As if sensing his curiosity, she added nothing more, returning to her task with focused attention. When she finished binding his arm with clean cloth, Irene moved to the hearth and stirred the contents of the iron pot. "You should eat, then rest. Questions can wait until morning." The stew she ladled into a wooden bowl contained unfamiliar roots alongside rabbit meat. Samuel accepted it with formal thanks in both Apache and halting English. The first spoonful released flavors both strange and wonderful on his tongue. "This is good," he acknowledged, genuine surprise in his voice. A ghost of a smile touched Irene's lips. One learns to make do with what the mountains provide. They ate in silence, the crackling fire and wind outside the only sounds. Samuel observed her covertly. Her hands bore calluses of hard work, yet her posture and occasional mannerisms suggested education beyond frontier upbringing. The locket he'd found, clearly hers, pointed to a past life far from these remote mountains. As he finished eating, exhaustion swept over him like a heavy blanket. Irene nodded toward a pile of furs in the corner opposite her bed. "You can sleep there tonight. Tomorrow we'll discuss how long you intend to remain in my valley." Samuel settled onto the furs, his back to the wall from ingrained caution. As his eyes grew heavy, he watched Irene add wood to the fire, her movements precise and economical. Just before sleep claimed him, a curious thought surfaced in his mind. For the first time in 62 years, he was sharing shelter with a woman who was neither kin nor tribal elder. The old ways would consider this a serious transgression. Yet somehow, as warmth finally reached his core, Samuel could not bring himself to care. Dawn light filtered through the oiled paper window when Samuel awoke, momentarily disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings. The events of yesterday returned quickly. The cabin, the woman, the reluctant shelter offered. He sat up silently, assessing his situation with a warrior's caution. Irene was already awake, her back to him as she worked at the small table. The cabin smelled of pine smoke and something else, a bitter, medicinal aroma he recognized as healing herbs being prepared. His arm throbbed dully beneath its bandage, but the fierce burning of infection had subsided. "Your fever broke during the night," Irene said without turning. Her perception of his wakefulness, without visual confirmation, was unsettling. "The poultice needs changing." Samuel rose, maintaining his dignity despite stiffness in his joints. "I thank you for your help," he said formally in English. "I will leave when you have tended the wound." Now she turned, eyebrow raised. "Leave for where exactly?" "Winter comes early to these mountains. The first snow will fall within 2 weeks. I have survived many winters. In a village with proper shelter and stored provisions," she countered, gesturing for him to sit at the table. "Not alone on a mountainside with nothing but that knife and whatever you can carry on your back." Her directness was unusual to Samuel, who was accustomed to the more circular communication style of his people. Yet he recognized the truth in her words. His plans, if they could be called that, had extended only to finding the source of the smoke. Beyond that lay only vague notions of continuing north or building a solitary shelter. "Why would you allow me to stay?" he asked, as she unwrapped his bandage. "You know nothing of me." Raynon's hands worked methodically, removing the old poultice and examining the wound with clinical detachment. "I know you're Apache. I know you travel alone, which suggests either a scouting mission or banishment. Since you've made no effort to return to your people, I suspect the latter." Samuel's face remained impassive, giving away nothing. I know you had ample opportunity to harm me yesterday while watching from the woods, yet chose observation instead, she continued, applying fresh herbs to his arm. And I know these mountains will kill an unprepared man regardless of his skills or intentions. She finished binding his arm and stepped back. I have practical reasons. Winter makes certain tasks difficult for one person alone. Hunting becomes dangerous. Firewood must be gathered in greater quantities. Samuel understood the unspoken proposal. Labor exchanged for shelter. A straightforward arrangement without sentiment or charity. It preserved his dignity while acknowledging reality. I am a skilled hunter, he offered, and I can repair your roof before heavy snow comes. It leaks above the northern corner. Surprise flickered across Irene's features. You notice that from outside. Samuel nodded. The shingles are warped. Water damage shows on the supporting beam. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Observant. It was my duty to notice details others missed. Samuel fell silent, unwilling to discuss his banishment. Irene accepted his reticence without comment, turning instead to practical matters. We should establish boundaries, she said, moving to the hearth where a pot of something bubbled. This cabin is small for two people unaccustomed to sharing space. Among my people, men and women have separate lodges, unless they are married, Samuel stated. Irene ladled what appeared to be porridge into two wooden bowls. We're not among your people, nor are we among mine. Here we make our own customs based on necessity. She placed a bowl before him, then seated herself opposite with her own. Between them on the table sat a curious arrangement of small carved figures, some dark wood, some light, positioned on a board marked with alternating squares. Samuel studied the objects while eating. The figures were clearly crafted with care, each distinct in shape and purpose. He recognized the craftsmanship even if their meaning eluded him. What is this? He asked, gesturing with his spoon. Chess, Irene replied. A game of strategy and foresight. She touched one of the tallest pieces. Kings, queens, knights, bishops, all with different movements and values. The objective is to trap your opponent's king while protecting your own. Samuel studied the board with new interest. You play this alone. Until now, she met his gaze directly. It requires two minds to be properly challenging. The invitation was clear yet unexpected. Games among his people were for children or ceremonial purposes, not casual pastimes for adults with work to be done. I would need to learn the rules, he said cautiously. Everyone does at first. Irene began resetting the pieces to their starting positions. The rules are fixed, but strategies are endless. Each player develops their own approach based on temperament and experience. Something about her description resonated with Samuel. Perhaps this strange game might provide insight into this even stranger woman, who lived alone in the mountains yet carried objects from the white man's world. I will learn, he decided, watching her hands arrange the pieces with practiced precision. Good, Irene nodded once. We begin after the morning chores. First, we need more firewood. She rose and reached for her coat. Conversation clearly ended. Samuel followed, recognizing the pattern being established. Work first, then words. It was a rhythm he understood and respected. Outside, the morning air bit with autumn's sharpness. But for the first time since his banishment, Samuel felt a curious sensation beneath his worry and weariness. It might, he realized with surprise, be something close to anticipation. A week passed in the small cabin, each day establishing patterns between its unlikely inhabitants. Mornings began with Irene changing Samuel's bandage, her touch growing more familiar though no less efficient. The infection receded, leaving healthy pink skin that would soon become another scar among many on his weathered body. Samuel repaid her care through labor. He repaired the leaking roof with meticulous attention, splitting new shingles from cedar with the practiced hands of one who had maintained tribal lodges for decades. When Irene approved his work with a simple nod, he felt an unexpected satisfaction. They spoke little during daylight hours, each comfortable with silence, while hands remained busy. Samuel reinforced the cabin's north wall against coming winter winds, while Irene preserved the last garden vegetables in jars of brine. When their paths crossed, They moved around each other with the cautious choreography of wild creatures sharing a watering hole, mutual awareness without unnecessary contact. Evenings brought the chessboard to the table between them. Samuel proved an apt pupil, grasping the basic movements quickly and developing strategies that occasionally surprised his teacher. His hunter's mind saw patterns in the arranged pieces, predicting movements several steps ahead. "You're not what I expected," Irene commented one night after he captured her queen through an elaborate series of moves. "What did you expect?" Samuel asked, curious despite himself. She considered him across the board. Someone less adaptable. "The Apache have a reputation for fierce resistance to change." "Adaptation and resistance are not opposing forces," Samuel replied. "The river resists the boulder yet flows around it. My people have survived by knowing when to stand firm and when to find new paths." "And which are you doing now, Samuel Running Wolf?" He had no immediate answer. Outside, wind moaned through pine branches, carrying the first hints of snow. Inside, firelight threw their shadows against the log walls, two figures hunched over a game from another world. That night, temperatures plummeted with sudden mountain severity. Samuel woke to his breath fogging in the cabin's chill air. The fire had burned low during the night, and frost patterns decorated the paper window. Silently, he rose to stoke the embers and add fresh logs from the indoor pile. As the flames rekindled, his eyes fell on an object he'd noticed, but not examined, a massive bearskin rug spread before the hearth. Its fur gleamed dark and thick in the firelight, its head still attached with glass eyes that caught red reflections from the flames. "My first winter here." Irene's voice came quietly from her bed. She had awakened with his movements. "He came looking for easy food when game grew scarce. I had no choice." Samuel studied the bear's size, impressed despite himself. "A woman alone against such a creature. Fear makes us capable of things we never imagined." She rose and wrapped herself in a woolen blanket, coming to stand beside him at the fire. "I'd never fired a rifle before coming to these mountains." This revelation surprised him. "Yet you survived. Necessity is an effective teacher." She knelt on the bearskin, extending her hands toward the growing flames. "That night, after I killed him, I butchered the carcass by lantern light, afraid to waste any part that might mean the difference between life and death before spring." Samuel lowered himself to sit opposite her, the bearskin between them. "You honor the bear by using all he provided. My people would approve." Something in his words seemed to reach her. Irene's usual reserve softened slightly as she rubbed her fingers through the thick fur. "I cried while skinning him," she admitted. "Not from fear, but gratitude. His death meant my life would continue." She glanced up. "Do your people believe animals give themselves willingly to worthy hunters?" "Some do," Samuel nodded. "Others believe we are all part of the same great circle. The bear becomes the man who becomes the soil that feeds the berry that feeds the bear. A more elegant philosophy than what I was taught." Her voice held a trace of bitterness. "My father's God placed man above all creatures, entitled to dominion without obligation." Samuel recognized the opening for what it was, the first personal detail she had volunteered. "Your father was a religious man, a missionary," she replied, then fell silent as if regretting the disclosure. Outside, the wind intensified, whistling through tiny gaps in the cabin's construction. The temperature continued dropping, promising the season's first significant storm. Samuel felt a subtle shift in the air between them, like ice beginning to thaw at its edge. "It will snow before morning," he observed, changing the subject to safer territory. Irene nodded, practical concerns replacing momentary vulnerability. "We should bring in more firewood while we can. Once it starts, we might be confined indoors for days." They dressed in silence and stepped outside into the pre-dawn darkness. The air had the tense, expectant quality that preceded major weather. Working efficiently, they carried armloads of split logs into the cabin until a substantial pile stood beside the hearth. As the eastern sky lightened to a strange yellowish gray, the first flakes began to fall. Not the gentle dusting of early autumn, but thick, determined snow driven by northern winds. From the cabin doorway, Samuel and Irene watched the world disappear beneath a swirling white veil. Neither spoke the obvious truth. They were now truly isolated, together until the mountain decided otherwise. The storm had made its decision for them. 3 days of howling wind and relentless snow kept them cabin-bound. Outside, drifts piled against the walls, occasionally shifting with ominous groans. Inside, Samuel and Irene established new rhythms dictated by confinement and proximity. Mornings began with Samuel rekindling the fire, while Irene prepared a simple breakfast of cornmeal porridge, sweetened with preserved berries. They ate mostly in silence, the small table between them like a neutral territory. Neither fully crossed daylight hours, though dim through snow-covered windows, were devoted to practical tasks. Irene sorted dried herbs and checked preserved foods. Samuel repaired tools and tended the hides he'd begun curing before the storm. They worked in parallel, conversations limited to practical matters, yet increasingly aware of the other's movements and habits. It was during the long evenings that change crept in, subtle as shadow. Chess games stretched longer, punctuated by questions that gradually shifted from survival matters to personal territories. "Your people had no word for chess," Irene observed on the third night, moving her knight with careful deliberation. "Yet you play as if born to it." Samuel considered the board. "The game is new, the thinking is not. Strategy, patience, sacrifice for greater gain, these are not foreign concepts to the Apache. You speak of your tribe often," she noted, "yet you're here instead of with them." The statement hung in the air, neither accusation nor question, yet demanding response. Outside, wind moaned through the pine trees like distant spirits. "I broke tribal law," Samuel said finally, capturing her bishop with a decisive move. "I led hunters to forbidden grounds when food grew scarce. The council determined my actions might bring war with northern tribes. Banishment was my punishment." Irene studied him across the board, her expression thoughtful. "You chose your people's needs over their rule. I chose wrongly, according to those with authority to judge." His voice carried no self-pity, merely statement of fact. "What of you, Irene Blackwood? You mentioned a missionary father, yet you live far from any mission or settlement." Her fingers tensed slightly on her queen piece. "My past is not relevant to our present circumstances. Nor was mine, yet you asked." Their eyes met in silent challenge, firelight reflecting in both gazes. After a long moment, Irene's mouth curved in the barest suggestion of a smile. "Touche," she conceded, a word Samuel didn't recognize but understood from context. "Let's say my father and I disagreed on what constitutes a proper life for a woman of education. He believed knowledge should serve only faith and family. I had different ambitions." It was the most she had revealed, though Samuel sensed vast territories left unexplored behind her careful words. Before he could respond, a sharp crack sounded outside, followed by a heavy thump that shook the cabin floor. "Tree limb breaking under snow weight," Irene explained, rising quickly. "We should check for damage." They discovered the fallen branch had narrowly missed the roof, but blocked the woodpile access. Another day of storm would leave them unable to reach additional firewood. "We need a way to move through deep snow," Samuel said, measuring the drifts with his eyes. "In my tribe we crafted walking frames from willow and rawhide." "Snowshoes," Irene nodded. "I've seen traders use them but never learned the construction." Samuel considered the available materials. "We have pine instead of willow, and your bearskin could provide binding strips. Different components, but the principle remains the same." "Show me," she said simply. The project consumed their 4th day of confinement. Samuel shaped wooden frames, while Irene prepared hide strips, following his instructions with quick intelligence. They worked side by side at the table, hands occasionally brushing as they exchanged tools. Each contact, though brief, seemed to linger in the air between them. "Your design differs from those I've seen before," Irene observed, as the shapes took form. Samuel nodded, bending a soaked pine strip into a teardrop curve. "Apache snowshoes are wider at the front for better weight distribution. The mountain snow here is different from the desert snow of my homeland. wetter, heavier. We must adapt accordingly. She echoed softly. Attention on the rawhide strips she was cutting. An interesting choice of word for a man who until recently walked alone. Samuel's hands paused momentarily in their work. As did you. The acknowledgement hung between them, not quite challenge, not quite invitation. Irene met his gaze briefly before returning to her task. These storms can last weeks, she said, practical again. We'll need more than snowshoes to survive if this one persists. In my village, storm times were for storytelling, Samuel offered. Old ones would share wisdom while young ones listened. No better time to preserve knowledge than when the world outside is buried. Irene's hands stilled on the rawhide. Are you suggesting we tell stories, Samuel Running Wolf? I suggest we acknowledge truth, he replied. We are two solitary people now bound by circumstance. We can maintain silence and distance, or we can speak of who we were before this mountain claimed us. She considered this, her face unreadable in the firelight. Perhaps, she said finally, but some stories are better left untold. All stories find their proper time, Samuel countered, returning to his work. They completed the snowshoes as dusk deepened into night, the storm showing no signs of abating. Their creation lay between them on the bearskin rug. Two pairs of snowshoes, one slightly smaller than the other, yet clearly matched in design and purpose. Neither mentioned the obvious symbolism of what they had crafted together, yet both felt its significance as they retired to their separate sleeping places, the fire burning low between them. The storm released its grip on the sixth day, departing with the same sudden decisiveness with which it had arrived. Morning sun transformed the snow-laden landscape into a blinding expanse of crystalline white. Samuel and Irene stood in the cabin doorway, squinting against the brilliance, assessing the changed world before them. The shed roof has collapsed, Irene observed, pointing to where her small storage structure sagged beneath snow's weight. We need to salvage what we can before the next storm. They strapped on their newly crafted snowshoes, testing the unfamiliar sensation of walking atop rather than through the deep drifts. Samuel moved with natural grace despite never having used this specific design before. Irene followed more cautiously, finding her balance with determined concentration. The damaged shed contained preserved food, additional tools, and various supplies Irene had stored for winter. Working together, they carefully removed items from beneath the partially collapsed roof, creating a prioritized pile for transport back to the cabin. Samuel's strength and Irene's organizational precision made them an effective team, neither needing to direct the other after the first few exchanges. This must come immediately, Irene said, pointing to a cedar box half buried beneath fallen shelving. Something in her voice, an unusual urgency, caught Samuel's attention. He worked carefully to extract the container without further disturbing the precarious structure. The box was smaller than he expected from her concern, perhaps the length of his forearm and half as wide, with a hinged lid secured by a simple iron clasp. Though not ornate, its surface bore careful carvings of intertwined vines and small flowers, executed with obvious skill. Your creation, he asked, handing it to her with deliberate care. Irene cradled the box against her chest. My mother's, one of few possessions I brought from before. The vulnerability in her expression was unexpected. Samuel nodded once, acknowledging both the box's importance and her rare personal disclosure without pressing further. They completed their salvage operation by midday, transferring the most critical supplies to the cabin before exhaustion and numbing cold forced them inside. The physical exertion in deep snow had drained both their energies, and they settled by the rekindled fire with steaming cups of pine needle tea. A brief truce from work declared by mutual unspoken consent. The cedar box rested on Irene's lap, her fingers occasionally tracing its carved patterns with absent familiarity. Samuel sat across from her on the bearskin rug, respectfully silent, yet unable to completely disguise his curiosity. You wish to know what's inside, Irene said eventually, statement rather than question. I wish to know what matters enough to risk retrieval before food or tools, Samuel corrected gently. But the contents are yours alone. Something in his response seemed to reach her. After a moment's hesitation, Irene unclasped the box and opened it carefully on her lap, angling it so Samuel could glimpse its contents from his position. Inside lay an assortment of small objects, each clearly selected for significant personal meaning rather than practical value. A pressed flower, its color faded to sepia. A small medal on a faded ribbon. What appeared to be a torn letter, its handwriting delicate and precise. A child's drawing of stick figures standing beside what might be a house or church. Fragments, Irene explained softly. All that remains of another life. Samuel recognized the sacred nature of such objects. His people kept similar tokens of significant events or lost loved ones, physical anchors for memories that might otherwise fade. Among Apache, we say such treasures hold part of a person's spirit, he offered. They keep our stories when memory falters. Irene extracted the medal, turning it in her fingers so firelight gleamed on its tarnished surface. University of Pennsylvania, School of Medicine. Not that they would grant me an actual degree. Women could attend lectures, but received only certificates. The revelation landed between them with the weight of a stone dropped in still water. Samuel absorbed this unexpected glimpse into her past with careful neutrality, though his surprise was genuine. You are a healer trained in white man's medicine, he stated, connecting this new information with her skilled treatment of his infected wound. I studied to become a doctor, yes, one of 12 women in a program of over 200 men. Bitterness edged her voice, most of whom believed our presence defiled their noble profession. She replaced the medal and withdrew the pressed flower, its fragile form nearly translucent with age. Blue cohosh, the first medicinal plant I identified without assistance. My proudest moment as a student. A faint smile touched her lips at the memory. Samuel watched her face, seeing the woman she must have been before mountain isolation hardened her features and manner. Younger, certainly, but also more hopeful. Someone who believed knowledge could forge a path through societal barriers. What brought you from university to wilderness? He asked. The question, gentle despite its directness. Irene's expression closed like a door against winter wind. She carefully returned the flower to its place and shut the box with deliberate finality. That's enough storytelling for today, she said, rising from her place by the fire. The storm has passed, but our work has only begun. We should inventory what we salvaged and what remains to be retrieved. Samuel accepted her withdrawal without comment, recognizing the boundaries she needed to maintain. They returned to practical tasks, the brief window into Irene's past, apparently closed for now. Yet something had shifted between them, a trust offered and honored rather than exploited. As they worked through the afternoon cataloging supplies, Samuel noticed Irene's posture seemed less rigid, her instructions less clipped. The cedar box remained on her small writing desk, no longer hidden away but placed where she could see it regularly. That night, as they sat across the chessboard for their evening game, Samuel observed, "You move your queen differently tonight, more boldly." Irene considered this, studying the board. Perhaps I've grown tired of defensive play. Their eyes met briefly across the carved pieces, mutual understanding passing between them like a current. Samuel nodded once and returned his attention to the game, respecting her pace while recognizing the invitation it contained. The journey into shared truth had begun, one careful move at a time. The days following the storm settled into productive routine. Mornings brought Samuel and Irene outside on their snowshoes to check trap lines and gather firewood. Afternoons were spent preserving any game caught, reinforcing the cabin's vulnerabilities discovered during the storm, and preparing for the next inevitable onslaught of winter. Evenings remained devoted to chess and increasingly comfortable silence, broken occasionally by selective personal disclosures that never pushed too deeply into painful territories. 2 weeks after the first heavy snow, Samuel woke before dawn, some ancient instinct pulling him from sleep. He lay still, listening to the cabin's familiar sounds, the settling of logs, the soft pop of embers in the hearth, Irene's measured breathing from her bed across the room. Everything seemed ordinary, yet his warrior's senses remained alert. Moving silently, he rose and approached the window facing east. The nearly full moon illuminated the snow-covered clearing with pale blue light, creating an otherworldly landscape of shadows and silver. Samuel scanned the tree line methodically, seeking whatever had disturbed his rest. There, a movement at the forest edge. A large shape, flowing like liquid shadow between the pines. Even at this distance, Samuel recognized the distinctive profile of a mountain lion, and an unusually large one at that. The predator paused at the clearing's edge, its posture conveying neither fear nor aggression, but calculating assessment. It was studying the cabin and its surroundings, memorizing the layout for future reference. After several minutes of stillness, it melted back into the forest darkness. Samuel remained at the window until dawn's first gray light revealed what the predator had left behind. Tracks circling the entire Apache perimeter, methodical and purposeful. The message was clear to anyone versed in wilderness language. The territory had been claimed, the inhabitants marked as potential prey. "How long has it been watching us?" Irene asked, when he showed her the tracks after breakfast. "Perhaps since before the storm," Samuel replied, kneeling to examine a particularly clear imprint. A male, older judging by the size. The right front paw shows scarring, likely from a previous fight or trap escape. Irene studied the distance between tracks. "He's larger than the one that troubled me 2 winters ago. You've encountered mountain lions before?" "Not directly. One killed 3 rabbits from my snares, but never approached the cabin." She frowned at the circular pattern. "This behavior is different, more deliberate." Samuel nodded, concern evident, despite his composed expression. "Winter drives predators to desperation. Game becomes scarce. The strong survive by taking calculated risks, such as attacking humans." Irene's voice remained practical, rather than fearful. "Possible, though not their preference. More likely he's drawn by our stored food and the smaller animals it attracts." Samuel gazed toward the forest edge where the creature had disappeared. "But hunger changes natural behavior. We should prepare accordingly." They spent the day implementing defensive measures. Samuel constructed specialized wooden barriers for the windows, functional shutters that could be secured from inside. Irene gathered specific herbs known to repel predators, burning them in small clay pots, positioned around the cabin's exterior. Together they devised an alarm system of tin cans and wire that would signal any approach to doors or windows. Working side by side on these projects, their usual reserve gradually gave way to more personal exchanges. "Your knowledge of the cat's behavior is extensive," Irene observed as they reinforced the cabin door with additional crossbeams. Samuel nodded. "Among my people, mountain lions are considered powerful medicine. To understand them is to respect them. I tracked many during my years as hunter." "Did you kill them?" "Only when necessary, when one developed a taste for our horses or children." He secured a wooden brace with practiced efficiency. "My first major hunt as a young man was for a lion that took a child from our summer camp. The elder said its spirit entered me during that hunt, giving me its stealth and patience." Irene passed him another brace. "Do you believe that?" Samuel considered her question with appropriate seriousness. "I believe experience shapes us in ways we cannot always explain. After that hunt I moved differently, saw differently. Whether spirit transfer or simply lessons hard learned makes little practical difference. A surprisingly pragmatic view for a spiritual man," Irene commented, the barest hint of approval in her tone. "Apache spirituality is rooted in survival, not abstract philosophy," Samuel replied. "The mountain lion teaches us not through mystical revelation, but through observation of its successful hunting strategies." As dusk approached, they completed their defensive preparations and retreated inside. The evening meal was simple, rabbit stew with dried wild onions, but satisfying after the day's physical labor. Chess was forgone by mutual agreement, both too tired for its mental demand. Instead, they sat before the fire, the bearskin rug between them as had become their custom for less formal conversations. Outside, darkness reclaimed the mountain, and with it came the heightened awareness that they were not the only hunters in these woods. "Will it attack?" Erin asked finally, her practical nature seeking honest assessment rather than comfort. "Eventually, if hunger drives it strongly enough," Samuel answered with equal directness. "But we are prepared, and we are an old man and a woman against a mountain lion," she observed, though without fear or self-pity. "Not favorable odds by most calculations." "An experienced warrior and a skilled healer," Samuel corrected gently. "Both tested by survival in harsh conditions." "I have faced worse odds." Irene studied him across the firelight. "You're not afraid." "I respect the danger. That is different from fear." He met her gaze steadily. "The lion reminds us of an important truth. Out here we survive together or not at all." For the first time since his arrival, Earring's expression softened into something approaching a genuine smile. "Then it seems, Samuel Running Wolf, that we are fortunate in our reluctant partnership." Samuel inclined his head slightly, acknowledging both her rare warmth and the truth of her statement. "Indeed, Erin Blackwood, most fortunate." Between them, firelight danced across the bearskin rug, trophy of another predator that had underestimated the cabin's solitary occupant. Neither mentioned the obvious parallel, but both recognized it as they prepared for sleep, more aware than ever of the thin walls separating their shared sanctuary from the wilderness beyond. The mountain lion's message had been received, but so too had its unintended lesson. Their survival now depended on mutual trust as much as sturdy walls or sharp weapons. The mountain lion made no immediate attempt on the cabin, though its tracks appeared regularly around the perimeter, a persistent reminder of patient predatory intent. November deepened toward December, bringing shorter days and bitter cold that kept Samuel and Irene increasingly confined to their shared space. One morning, after checking the trapline and finding 2 rabbits, Samuel returned to discover Irene struggling to breathe, her face flushed with fever. She waved away his concern with characteristic independence, insisting it was merely a winter chill. By evening, however, her condition had deteriorated significantly. Harsh, rattling coughs racked her body, and her skin burned beneath Samuel's tentative touch. "Chest infection," she managed between labored breaths. "Need medicine." "Cabinet." Samuel found her medical supplies neatly organized in a small cabinet beside her bed. Glass bottles of various tinctures stood in ordered rows, each labeled in precise handwriting, but which would address her condition. "White willow, for fever," Irene instructed weakly. "The blue bottle, lungwort tincture." He administered the medicines as directed, supporting her head as she swallowed with evident difficulty. Her vulnerability struck him forcefully, this strong, self-sufficient woman, now dependent on his care. Throughout the night, her fever raged. Samuel maintained cool compresses on her forehead and chest, recalling similar care he'd provided for tribal members during illness. Near dawn, Irene's fever finally broke. She fell into exhausted sleep while Samuel watched over her, concern etched in the deep lines of his face. Though she now breathed more easily, her color remained worryingly pale. As morning light filtered through the cabin windows, Samuel searched for additional medicines that might speed her recovery. In the storage trunk beneath her bed, he discovered a leather-bound journal unlike the practical household ledgers she kept for supplies and hunting records. This book was clearly something different, a scientific document filled with detailed botanical illustrations and extensive notes. Samuel hesitated, respecting Erin's privacy yet needing information that might aid her recovery. Necessity overrode courtesy, and he carefully opened the journal to find precisely what he sought: systematic documentation of medicinal plants, their properties, preparation methods, and applications. The book represented years of meticulous work. Pressed plant specimens accompanied many entries, while others featured detailed anatomical drawings showing roots, leaves, flowers, and seeds. Most striking were the margin notes, where Irene had documented comparisons between conventional medical treatments and indigenous approaches to similar conditions. One page detailed lungwort treatment, noting native preparation methods superior to university protocol. Boiling destroys essential compounds. Cold infusion preserves efficacy. Observed Apache healers using similar approach with different regional species. Samuel froze at the reference to his people. When had Irene observed Apache medicine? She had never mentioned such encounters. More pressing, however, was the entry that followed. A detailed protocol for severe respiratory infections using ingredients he recognized in her supply cabinet. Following the journal's precise instructions, Samuel prepared the complex medicine, a precise mixture of lungwort tincture, white pine bark, wild cherry and other herbs in specific proportions. The process required careful timing and methodology, unlike the simple dosing she'd requested during her fevered state. When Irene woke hours later, Samuel sat beside her, the completed medicine and open journal on the small table between them. "You found my research," she observed, voice weak, but mind clearly alert. "I sought better medicine for your illness," he replied simply. The journal provided it. Rather than the anger or defensive withdrawal he expected, Irene merely sighed. "I know you studied my people's healing ways," Samuel said carefully. Though not when or how. She accepted the medicine he offered, drinking it without hesitation despite its bitter aroma. After a moment she spoke with evident effort. "5 years ago, before coming here, I traveled with a university expedition, documenting indigenous medical practices throughout the territories." Her eyes met his with unusual directness. "We visited several Apache settlements, with permission from your tribal council." I was the expedition's medical officer. Samuel absorbed this revelation with outward calm, though questions multiplied in his mind. "You never mentioned this connection. Would it have changed anything? Made you trust me more, or less?" She attempted to sit up, but weakness forced her back against the pillows. "My expedition collected knowledge from your people and many others. Some colleagues saw only primitive superstition. I saw effective medicine refined through generations of observation." Samuel glanced at the journal's meticulous pages. "This is no exploitation. You tested the methods yourself, refined them. Science at its proper purpose, learning truth regardless of its source." Irene's voice strengthened slightly as she spoke of her work. "My colleagues wanted to patent remedies and sell them in Eastern pharmacies without credit to the cultures who developed them. I refused to participate," understanding dawned. "This disagreement, it contributed to your presence here, away from your academic world." A shadow crossed Irene's face, one of several professional disappointments that made wilderness preferable to civilization. She gestured weakly toward the journal. "The final entries document plants specific to these mountains." My work continued, even in exile. Samuel recognized the weight of what she'd shared, not just information, but vulnerability. He responded with equal honesty. "Among my people, healing knowledge is sacred trust, passed through specific lineages. Sharing outside the tribe was once punishable by death." "And now?" Irene asked, watching him carefully. Samuel considered the woman before him, her dedication to knowledge, her respect for its origins, her isolation mirroring his own. "Now I see a healer who honors the wisdom she gathered, who uses it to help rather than exploit. My people would recognize a kindred spirit regardless of birth." Something shifted in Irene's expression, relief perhaps, or appreciation of his acceptance. Her hand moved to rest briefly atop his where it lay near her on the bed, their first intentional touch not required by practical necessity. "Rest," Samuel said gently. "The medicine needs time to work." As Irene drifted back to sleep, Samuel remained beside her, the botanical journal open on his lap, a bridge between their separate worlds that had begun, however tentatively, to converge. Irene's recovery progressed slowly. The chest infection retreated, but left her weakened and unable to venture outside during the deepening winter cold. For the first time since his arrival, Samuel assumed full responsibility for their survival, checking trap lines, gathering firewood, preparing meals and tending to Irene with a gentle competence that surprised them both. "You've done this before," Irene observed, one evening as Samuel changed the poultice on her chest. "Cared for the ill." Samuel nodded, his weathered hands moving with practiced precision. In my youth, I trained briefly with our medicine man before the tribal council recognized my talents lay with hunting and protection instead. But basic healing knowledge was expected of all warriors who might need to tend wounded companions far from home. Your touch is gentler than many physicians I've known, she commented, watching him work. A faint smile touched his lips. Perhaps because I do not charge by the hour. Irene's surprised laugh turned into a cough, though less severe than days before. Samuel supported her as the spasm passed, then helped her drink a warm infusion of herbs from her botanical collection. December brought longer nights and heavier silence to their mountain sanctuary. With Irene often sleeping and outdoor activities limited by harsh weather, Samuel sought occupation for his restless hands during evening hours. From a piece of cedar set aside for firewood, he began carving what Irene initially assumed would be a new tool or utensil. Night after night, Samuel worked on the object, his knife moving with deliberate precision in the firelight. Irene watched from her sickbed, curiosity growing as the piece took unfamiliar shape, a cylinder gradually hollowed, smoothed, and refined through hours of patient labor. 1 week into the project, Samuel drilled precisely spaced holes along the cylinder's length. Another 3 evenings were devoted to careful interior shaping and testing, his lips occasionally touching the mouthpiece, then returning to subtle adjustments with his knife. On the night of the winter solstice, the longest darkness of the year, Samuel finally set aside his tools and held up the completed piece. A flute, approximately the length of his forearm, polished to a warm glow by repeated handling. Among my people, the longest night is for reflection and remembrance, he explained, answering Irene's unspoken question. Music helps carry thoughts to those separated by distance or death. He raised the instrument to his lips and began to play. The sound that emerged was unlike anything Irene had heard. Neither the formal compositions of concert halls nor the popular tunes of city gatherings. This music seemed born directly from the mountain itself, sometimes mimicking wind through pine boughs, sometimes capturing a hawk's lonely cry, sometimes expressing emotions too complex for words. Samuel played with eyes closed, lost in creation. The firelight caught the deep lines of his face, illuminating both strength and vulnerability in his expression. Irene watched, transfixed, as this private ceremony unfolded. The music seemed to fill the small cabin with presence, as if others gathered around them unseen, but when the final note faded, silence held new depth. Irene found her eyes unexpectedly moist, moved by music that somehow expressed her own unspoken griefs and hopes. That was, she began, then found conventional praise inadequate. A remembrance song, Samuel supplied. For those left behind, your people have similar traditions? Nothing so. Irene hesitated, searching for the right word. Immediate. My father's church had hymns. My university had formal recitals. But music as direct communication? No. Samuel turned the flute in his hands, examining his craftsmanship. For Apache, music is not performance, but connection to ancestors, to spirits, to our deeper selves. He looked up, meeting her gaze. To each other, the implication hung in the air between them, an acknowledgement of the bond forming through their shared isolation and mutual dependence. Could you teach me? Irene asked suddenly, surprising herself with the request. Samuel's expression registered momentary astonishment before settling into thoughtful consideration. It is not customary to teach flute-making to women in my tribe. The instrument is traditionally for young men seeking spiritual guidance or expressing courtship intentions. I see, Irene said, withdrawing slightly. Cultural boundaries. I understand. However, Samuel continued, we are not in my tribe's territory, nor bound by their specific customs. Here we create our own traditions based on necessity and respect. He extended the flute toward her. I will teach you, if you truly wish to learn. Irene accepted the instrument with careful reverence, recognizing the significance of his offer. I do. Then we begin tomorrow. For tonight, Samuel gently reclaimed the flute. "May I play once more?" A healing melody this time. As Irene nodded, Samuel began another song, gentler than the first, with rhythms that seemed to match natural breathing. She found herself relaxing into the sound, her body responding to the musical patterns as if to medicine. Later, as snow fell silently outside and firelight cast their shadows against the cabin walls, Irene drifted towards sleep, with a lingering resonance of cedar notes surrounding her. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Samuel return the flute to a special place beside his sleeping area, handling it with the care usually reserved for sacred objects. "Among your people," she murmured sleepily, "does music ever express things words cannot?" Samuel looked over at her, his expression softening in the dim light. "Always. Some truths can only be spoken through wind and wood." "And what truth did tonight's music speak?" she asked, awareness fading as sleep approached. Samuel was silent for so long that Irene thought he might not answer. Just before consciousness slipped away completely, his response reached her, that no exile is complete when two walk the same path. In her dreams that night, Irene heard flute music intertwining with distant church bells and university choirs, past and present harmonizing in ways she had never imagined possible. January brought brittle cold that transformed the mountain into a realm of ice and silence. As Irene's strength returned, she and Samuel established new patterns of coexistence. Mornings began with flute lessons, Samuel guiding her fingers over the instrument's holes, teaching breath control and the subtle nuances that transformed mere notes into evocative sound. Though Irene lacked Samuel's innate musicality, her scientific precision and determination produced steady improvement. "Music and medicine require similar disciplines," she observed one morning. "Precision, patience, understanding how small adjustments create significant effects." Samuel nodded approvingly. "You begin to see connections between separate worlds. This is wisdom." Their days were consumed by winter survival, maintaining heat, ensuring adequate food, and reinforcing the cabin against increasingly violent storms. The mountain lion remained a shadowy presence, its tracks appearing regularly, though it made no direct approach. Samuel and Irene never ventured out alone, another unspoken shift in their relationship. During a rare clear day in late January, they set out to check traplines and hunt, hoping to replenish their dwindling meat supply. The snow-covered forest stood silent under crystalline blue sky, their breath forming clouds in the frigid air. They moved with practiced coordination, following established routes while remaining alert for both potential game and predatory threats. Near a frozen stream where they'd successfully trapped rabbits before, Samuel halted suddenly, raising one hand in the silent signal for caution they'd developed. Irene stopped immediately, following his gaze toward what appeared to be an ordinary snow-covered rock jutting from the stream bank. "What is it?" she whispered when Samuel continued staring. Without answering, he approached the spot with uncharacteristic tension evident in his movements. Kneeling, he carefully brushed away snow from the stone surface, revealing what had caught his attention. A triangular object protruding slightly from the frozen ground. With practiced care, Samuel extracted the item, a stone arrowhead of distinctive design, its surface decorated with markings Irene had never seen before. Though clearly ancient, its placement was deliberate, positioned where only someone following their specific path would discover it. "Apache," Samuel said quietly, turning the artifact in his palm. "Not simply any arrowhead. This carries council markings, specifically the symbol of our tribal judge. Could it be old? Perhaps from historical hunting parties," Irene suggested, noting his evident concern. Samuel shook his head slowly. "The placement is too precise, too recent. This was set here for me to find." He scanned the surrounding forest with narrowed eyes. "We are being watched." The revelation transformed their peaceful hunting expedition into a tense return journey. Both remained hyper-vigilant, though Samuel assured Irene that immediate danger was unlikely. "If they meant harm, we would never have seen the warning," he explained. "This is communication, not threat." Back at the cabin, Samuel examined the arrowhead more thoroughly by firelight, his expression grave as he traced the intricate markings with his fingertip. "What does it mean?" Irene asked, preparing tea to warm them after the cold journey. Samuel remained silent for several moments, weighing his response. "It means the council knows where I am. They have been observing us." He looked up, meeting her concerned gaze. "And they are considering my situation." "Considering what, exactly? Whether banishment might be reconsidered?" His voice remained neutral, though Irene detected undertones of complex emotion. This particular symbol combination suggests deliberation rather than final judgment. Irene absorbed this information while bringing their tea to the table. "How would they know your location? The mountain is vast, and we've encountered no one. Apache scouts can follow trails others cannot see," Samuel replied. "And my former apprentice would recognize my methods, my patterns." "Your apprentice, the one who supported your banishment," Irene clarified, remembering previous conversations. Samuel nodded. "Hawkfeather. He would have been assigned to monitor the boundaries, including these mountains." The implications settled between them, unspoken but evident. If Samuel's banishment were lifted, he would have the option to return to his people, to rejoin the community that had been his entire life before exile brought him to this cabin and the woman who inhabited it. "What will you do?" Irene finally asked, her tone carefully neutral despite the gravity of her question. Samuel studied the arrowhead once more before carefully placing it on the mantel above the fireplace. "Nothing immediately. The message indicates deliberation, not decision. We continue as before." But both recognized that before had irrevocably changed. The isolated world they'd created together, built of facets but increasingly shaped by choice, was now touched by external forces. The boundaries of their shared exile had been breached. That evening, rather than their usual chess game or flute practice, they sat in contemplative silence before the fire. Samuel eventually spoke, his deep voice gentle in the quiet cabin. "Among my people it is said that a warrior must sometimes leave the tribe to discover his true path." He gazed into the flames. "I always believed my path was clear, service to the Apache as guardian and hunter. Exile seemed the end of purpose." Irene watched his profile, strong features illuminated by firelight. "And now I understand that paths may fork in unexpected ways." His eyes met hers across the hearth. "One may serve purpose beyond the boundaries of what was planned or expected." The implicit question hung between them: was there purpose in this shared exile, this unlikely partnership between an Apache warrior and a female physician? Neither spoke it aloud, yet both felt its weight in the silence that followed. Later, as moonlight cast blue shadows through the cabin windows, Irene wrote in her botanical journal while Samuel played his flute. A new melody that seemed to pose questions rather than express certainties. The stone arrowhead rested on the mantel, its presence a reminder that their mountain sanctuary existed within a larger world that might eventually demand choices neither was yet prepared to make. February arrived with alternating periods of heavy snow and crystalline cold. The arrowhead remained on the mantel, a constant reminder of unseen watchers, yet no further tribal messages appeared. Samuel and Irene continued their winter routine, though an unspoken awareness colored their interactions, the knowledge that their isolation might not be permanent. One morning, after a night of particularly fierce winds, Samuel opened the cabin door to find a startling addition to their porch, a hunting bow of exceptional craftsmanship leaning carefully against the doorframe. No tracks marred the fresh snow surrounding the cabin, as if the weapon had materialized from the storm itself. "Hawkfeather," Samuel said immediately, bringing the bow inside with reverent hands. "This is his work. I would recognize it anywhere." The bow was a work of art, Osage orange wood backed with sinew, wrapped with intricate patterns at the grip. Small symbols had been burned into the wood near each end, their meaning clear only to those versed in Apache tradition. "Your apprentice," Irene confirmed, watching Samuel examine the gift. "The same who supported your banishment," Samuel nodded, fingers tracing the detailed workmanship. "The same who now brings a peace offering. This is no ordinary bow. It is ceremony grade, the kind presented to honor distinguished warriors." "What does it mean?" Irene asked, the question extending beyond the physical object. It means hawk feather seeks reconciliation. Samuel added, studying the specific markings, that something has changed within the tribe. He looked up, meeting Irene's gaze. The symbol indicates food scarcity. The tribe struggles without my hunting knowledge. Understanding dawned in Irene's expression. The council considers lifting your banishment out of necessity. Practical need often overrides principle, Samuel confirmed, setting the bow carefully on the table between them. Especially when children grow hungry. The implication settled in silence, broken only by the crackle of fire in the hearth. If Samuel's exile ended, decisions would be required, not theoretical possibilities to contemplate by firelight, but immediate choices with far-reaching consequences. "What will you do?" Irene finally asked, the question she'd avoided since the arrowhead's appearance. Before Samuel could answer, a sound outside captured their attention, the distinctive crunch of footsteps in snow approaching the cabin. Both moved with practiced coordination, Samuel retrieving his knife, while Irene positioned herself near the rifle, kept loaded for mountain lion defense. The footsteps stopped outside their door, followed by a formal knock. 3 measured strikes against the wood. Samuel and Irene exchanged glances, communication passing between them without words. After a moment, Samuel moved to open the door, body positioned to protect Irene, while maintaining dignity appropriate for receiving a tribal visitor. On their threshold stood a young Apache warrior, perhaps 30 years old. His tall figure, wrapped in furs against the bitter cold. Though his face remained composed, surprise flickered briefly in his eyes at the sight of Samuel and Irene standing together in the cabin's warmth. "Hawk feather," Samuel acknowledged formally in Apache language. "You honor my dwelling with your presence." The younger man inclined his head respectfully. "Elder Running Wolf, I come with message from the council." His gaze shifted momentarily to Irene before returning to Samuel. "May we speak?" Samuel stepped aside, inviting his former apprentice into the cabin with appropriate ceremony. Hawk Feather entered, removing his outer furs and accepting the seat offered near the fire. His observant eyes took in the cabin's interior, the chess set, the flute, the shared living arrangements, though his expression revealed nothing. "This is Irene Blackwood," Samuel introduced in English, including her in the conversation. "Healer and keeper of this cabin. She has offered shelter through winter months." Hawk Feather acknowledged her with formal courtesy, speaking in accented but clear English. "The mountain honors those with strength to endure its challenges. You must possess great medicine to thrive in such isolation." "I manage adequately," Irene replied with equal formality. "Your elders' skills have proven valuable during harsh weather." A subtle smile touched Hawk Feather's lips. "His skills are missed among our people as well." He turned to Samuel, shifting back to Apache language. "The council sends message. Your hunting territories were correct. Game has abandoned the southern ranges as you predicted. Children go hungry despite our best efforts." Samuel listened without interruption. Face impassive, though Irene had learned to read the subtle tensions around his eyes that indicated emotional impact. "The council proposes ending your banishment," Hawk Feather continued, "allowing your return before spring hunting season. Your knowledge is needed if the tribe is to survive until summer." The offer hung in the air, significant in both what was said and unsaid. Redemption, restoration of position, return to the only community Samuel had known for 62 years. Yet Irene noted the careful phrasing, the invitation extended to Samuel alone, with no acknowledgement of what might become of their partnership. "The council shows wisdom in recognizing changed circumstances," Samuel replied diplomatically. "When must they have my answer?" "I remain in these mountains 3 days before returning with your decision," Hawk Feather explained. "There is no need for immediate response." The conversation shifted to tribal matters. Families Samuel had known, changes during his absence, preparations for spring ceremonies. Throughout, Irene maintained respectful silence while preparing a meal for their visitor. her scientific mind observing the complex dynamics between mentor and apprentice, exile and tribal representative. When Hawkfeather eventually departed to make camp elsewhere in the forest, declining the offer to stay in the cabin with carefully neutral explanation, Samuel and Irene found themselves alone again, the bow still resting on their table like a bridge between separate worlds. "You should go," Irene said simply, breaking the silence. "Your people need you." Samuel studied her face, reading the conflicting emotions beneath her practical tone. "And what of needs here?" The question contained multitudes neither was prepared to fully address. Instead, Irene touched the bow gently, acknowledging its beauty and significance. 3 days, she said softly. "We have 3 days before you must decide." Samuel nodded, understanding passing between them. Some conversations required proper timing, and this one would wait until morning. For tonight they returned to familiar routine. Chess by firelight, the comfort of established patterns carrying them through uncertainty that neither could yet fully articulate. Morning arrived with stern clarity, sunlight reflecting off snow with diamond brilliance that belied the somber mood within the cabin. Samuel and Irene moved through breakfast preparations with practiced coordination, yet tension lingered between them. Unspoken questions about decisions that could no longer be postponed. As they sat across from each other at the small table, steam rising from pine needle tea in shared silence, Irene finally spoke. "You must return to your people," she stated without preamble, her tone measured and practical. "They need your knowledge to survive until spring." Samuel studied her face, noting the careful control in her expression. "The need is temporary. Once hunting grounds are re-established, younger warriors can manage. You would refuse redemption, the restoration of your place among them?" Irene challenged gently. "I consider all possibilities," Samuel replied, his weathered hands cradling the warm cup, "including that my place may have changed during exile." The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to address it directly. Instead, Irene rose and retrieved a large piece of parchment from her writing desk, a blank page from her botanical journal, and spread it on the table, weighting its corners with small stones. "Show me," she requested, offering him a charcoal stick. "Show me the territories between here and your village. Help me understand what you're considering." Samuel accepted the charcoal, considering her request. With deliberate strokes, he began mapping the mountain landscape, ridgelines and valleys, rivers and forests, the tribal lands to the south and their cabins positioned to the north. His hunter's memory recreated the terrain with remarkable precision, each feature placed with confidence, born from decades traversing these lands. "The village lies here," he indicated, marking a sheltered valley, protected from northern winds, near the river junction where salmon run in spring. His charcoal traced the path he'd taken during exile. 3 days' journey in summer, 5 or more with deep snow. Irene watched his hands work, the map growing more detailed beneath his skilled fingers. When the basic geography was established, she took a pen from her desk and dipped it in blue ink. "The botanical resources," she explained, beginning to mark locations on his map. "Medicinal plants with seasonal availability. Here, black cohosh in late spring. Here, wild ginger root, accessible even in winter. Here, pine forests with year-round remedies." Together they created a composite knowledge map. His understanding of hunting territories, game migration patterns, and tribal boundaries, merging with her documentation of medicinal resources, seasonal water availability, and terrain suitable for specific cultivations. As the map filled with their combined wisdom, a pattern emerged that neither had articulated a potential solution previously unconsidered. "This ridge," Samuel noted, indicating a position approximately midway between the tribal lands and their current location. "It offers access to both territories within single-day journeys." Irene studied the spot, adding her own observations. "Southern exposure, protected from harsh winds. Sufficient elevation for defense, yet accessible to valley resources." Her finger traced potential routes. "One could reasonably travel between this point and either location, as seasons and needs dictated." Their eyes met across the map, the unspoken possibility taking form between them. A compromise, Samuel said carefully. Not full return, not continued exile. A new position connected to the tribe, yet maintaining, he paused, searching for appropriate phrasing. Independence, Irene supplied, and the opportunity for cultural exchange. Your people's knowledge preserved through practical application rather than academic exploitation. Samuel considered this, his expression thoughtful. The council seeks my hunting skills, not my permanent return. Seasonal guidance might satisfy their needs while allowing, again he hesitated, while allowing other commitments. Irene completed, her scientific directness finally addressing what they had circled. Samuel, these months have created something neither of us anticipated, a partnership of mutual benefit, and now it was her turn to hesitate, uncharacteristically uncertain, unexpected value beyond mere survival. Samuel nodded slowly, the admission significant from this independent woman who had chosen mountain solitude over civilization's constraints. Among Apache, sometimes two people walked together because paths aligned through fate rather than tribal arrangement. Such partnerships are respected for their strength. As colleagues, Irene clarified, maintaining propriety. As life allies, Samuel corrected gently. Age does not diminish the human need for companionship of like minds and compatible spirits. Color touched Irene's cheeks, not the flush of illness, but something he had never witnessed in their months together. Before she could respond, Samuel continued, his voice gaining certainty. I will propose an alternative to the council, not rejection of their offer, but adaptation. I will provide seasonal hunting guidance, traveling between territories while maintaining. He glanced around the cabin that had become home, this place of shared wisdom. And if they refuse, Irene asked, practical even in this moment of possibility. Samuel's expression grew solemn. Then I face true choice between people, and he met her gaze, directly, person. The word's significance was unmistakable, singular rather than plural, specific rather than general. For the first time, the nature of their developing bond was acknowledged not as circumstantial alliance, but as personal attachment. Irene looked down at the map they had created together, their different inks intermingling across the landscape like conversation made visible. Her finger traced the ridge Samuel had identified, the potential compromise location, neither fully with his people nor fully in exile. We have 2 more days before you must answer Hawk Feather, she said finally. Let us consider all possibilities with appropriate thoroughness. Samuel recognized her retreat to scientific methodology as emotional self-protection, a response he respected rather than challenged. They had ventured into territories more complex than those depicted on their map, and navigation required careful deliberation. 2 days, he agreed, rolling the map carefully and securing it with one of Irene's specimen ties. Time enough for wisdom to emerge from possibility. Outside, winter sun began its early descent toward mountain peaks, shadows lengthening across the snow. Inside, 2 people, who had begun as reluctant shelter sharers, contemplated futures neither had imagined when autumn first brought them together. The 2 days granted for deliberation passed in a curious blend of ordinary routine and extraordinary anticipation. Samuel and Irene continued winter survival tasks, checking trap lines, preserving meat, maintaining adequate firewood, while engaged in deeper conversations about possible futures than they had permitted themselves throughout their months together. On the morning Hawk Feather was expected to return for Samuel's answer, dawn broke with unusual clarity, painting the snow-covered mountains in hues of rose and gold. Samuel rose early, as was his custom, rekindling the fire and preparing morning tea. As steam rose from the kettle, he heard Irene stir behind the privacy screen they had established months earlier in the cabin's corner. Samuel? Her voice carried an uncharacteristic hesitation. Before Hawk Feather arrives, I wish to speak with you privately. He turned to find Irene emerging from behind the screen, transformed from her usual practical appearance. Her grey-streaked hair, normally bound in a simple braid, had been arranged in a more elaborate style, soft tendrils framing a face that somehow appeared years younger in the morning light. She wore her one dress, a garment Samuel had glimpsed but never seen her wear. Deep blue fabric highlighting eyes that met his with determined directness, despite obvious vulnerability. "You look—" Samuel paused, searching for appropriate words in English. Finding none adequate, he switched to Apache, offering a phrase that conveyed dignified beauty appropriate to a woman of wisdom. Irene didn't understand the specific words, but their intent registered in her slight smile. "I wanted to honor the significance of today's conversation," she explained, moving toward him with measured steps. In her hands she carried a small object Samuel hadn't seen before, a silver hairbrush with an ornate handle, tarnished from age yet clearly once belonging to a woman of means. "My mother's," Irene explained, following his gaze to the object. "I've kept it wrapped in oiled cloth all these years, using it only on rare occasions." She set it carefully on the table between them. Today seemed to warrant its use. Samuel recognized the gesture's significance, Irene deliberately connecting her past with this present moment, bridging the woman she had been before mountain isolation with the one who stood before him now. "I have reached a decision regarding Hawkfeather's offer," Samuel said, respecting her evident desire for formality. "But I would hear your thoughts before he arrives." Irene squared her shoulders slightly, scientific precision evident in her carefully chosen words. "I've analyzed all practical factors, your tribal obligations, survival considerations, the medical and botanical research possibilities. All logical assessments support your return to guide your people through immediate crisis." She paused, then continued with visible effort. "However, I find my conclusion influenced by non-quantifiable factors." Samuel waited, allowing her the space to proceed at her own pace. "In my previous life," Irene continued, "I rejected traditional female expectations, marriage, domestic confinement, intellectual subordination. Science offered freedom through objective detachment." Her fingers touched the silver brush lightly. "I chose isolation here, not merely from professional disappointment, but to create a world where my work could proceed without compromise." She met his gaze directly. "I never anticipated finding partnership that enhanced rather than limited my purpose. Yet these months have demonstrated that possibility, as they have for me," Samuel acknowledged, his deep voice gentle. "My people value wisdom, partnership of all bonds, two who strengthen each other's purpose, rather than demanding its sacrifice." "Then I propose an arrangement," Irene stated with characteristic directness. "One that honors both your tribal obligations and," she hesitated momentarily, "our mutual benefit. Seasonal movement between territories as our map outlined, teaching exchanges between your tribal healers and my medical knowledge. Separate domains of expertise, united through respect and," she paused again, searching for appropriate terminology, "through heart knowledge as well as mind knowledge," Samuel supplied, using an Apache concept that encompassed emotional connection, without romantic sentimentality inappropriate to their age and circumstances. "Yes," Irene agreed, tension visibly easing from her shoulders. "A formal alliance of purpose and companionship. Among my people," Samuel explained, "such arrangements between older adults are recognized through simple ceremony, not the elaborate rituals of young marriage, but dignified acknowledgement of chosen partnership." Something softened in Irene's expression. What would such a ceremony entail? An exchange of valued possessions, statements of intent witnessed by respected others, shared meals symbolizing sustained commitment. Samuel hesitated briefly before adding, "And among Apache, a gesture of physical connection, traditionally the braiding together of hair strands from each person." Irene's hand moved unconsciously to her arranged hair, understanding dawning. "Hence my mother's brush this morning. I seem to have anticipated aspects of your tribal customs without realizing it." "Wisdom often moves ahead of conscious thought," Samuel observed with gentle humor. their eyes held across the small table, decades of separate life experiences converging into this unexpected shared path. Without further words, Irene extended her hands, palms upward in offering. Samuel placed his weathered hands atop hers, the gesture simple yet profound in its voluntary nature. "When Hawk Feather arrives," Irene said softly, "we will present our proposal together." Samuel nodded, their joined hands a physical manifestation of the decision reached. "Together," he affirmed. Outside, morning sun transformed ordinary snow into fields of diamond brilliance. Inside, two people who had begun as reluctant sheltermates prepared to formally declare intention that neither had anticipated when autumn winds first brought them together. The silver hairbrush caught morning light from the window, its tarnished surface nonetheless, reflecting the cabin's interior, not as it had been when Samuel first arrived, a place of solitary exile, but as it had become a home created through shared purpose and growing affection that transcended cultural differences and life's disappointment. When Hawk Feather's knock sounded an hour later, they were ready to present their unified proposal, not as supplicants seeking permission, but as elders offering wisdom partnership that might benefit both worlds they inhabited. Hawk Feather arrived not alone but accompanied by 3 tribal elders, 2 ravens, the aging war chief, Spotted Fawn, matriarch of the Medicine Society, and Grey Wolf, the tribal council's head. Their unexpected presence transformed what Samuel and Irene had anticipated as a simple response into a formal delegation with significantly greater implications. Samuel welcomed them with appropriate ceremony, speaking in Apache while Irene prepared tea and set out their modest winter provisions to honor the guests. The elders entered with dignified reserve, their weathered faces revealing nothing as they took seats around the cabin's central table. Their assessing gazes moved deliberately from Samuel to Irene to the evidence of shared dwelling, the chess set, flute, botanical journals and maps still rolled carefully at the table's edge. Us seated, Grey Wolf removed from his ceremonial pouch a pipe of remarkable craftsmanship, its long stem carved with tribal history symbols, its bowl made from red stone quarried from sacred mountains far to the south. The appearance of this particular pipe, Samuel knew, indicated matters of highest tribal significance. Its presence this honored and complicated their carefully prepared proposal. "We bring greetings from the council," Grey Wolf began formally in Apache, which Samuel translated for Irene in quiet asides. "The winter has tested our people severely. Game has abandoned traditional territories, as Running Wolf warned before his banishment." 2 ravens nodded solemnly. "Young hunters return empty-handed from grounds that once provided abundantly. Children grow thin. The tribal stores will not last until spring thaw." Spotted Fawn, her ancient face lined with decades of accumulated wisdom, studied Irene with particular intensity. "We come not merely for hunting knowledge, but seeking guidance for illness that spreads among our young ones. Coughing sickness that our traditional remedies cannot fully heal." Samuel translated this last statement with special care, watching understanding dawn in Irene's expression. The situation was more dire than Hawk Feather had indicated. Not merely food scarcity, but illness threatening the tribe's most vulnerable members. "The council proposes more than ending banishment," Grey Wolf continued, gesturing for Hawk Feather to prepare the ceremonial pipe. "We seek alliance with Running Wolf, and—" he paused, looking directly at Irene, "the medicine woman with whom he has found shelter." Samuel's controlled expression revealed nothing of his surprise at this unexpected development. "The council is aware of Dr. Blackwood's presence," he asked carefully. 2 ravens made a dismissive gesture. "Our scouts have observed for months. We know she healed your wound infection. We have seen her knowledge of plants and medicine. Most importantly, we have seen 2 functioning as one, evidence of harmony rare even among tribal matches." As Hawk Feather completed the pipe's preparation with ritualistic precision, Spotted Fawn addressed Irene directly, speaking in halting but clear English that surprised both cabin occupants. "I learned your language from missionaries," the elder woman explained. I understand more than I speak. I have watched you gathering medicine plants. Your methods differ from ours, yet your respect for what grows is similar. Irene inclined her head respectfully. The Apache understanding of medicinal plants developed through generations of observation. My scientific methods merely confirm what your people already knew through experience. This acknowledgement clearly pleased the old medicine woman, whose eyes crinkled slightly. Knowledge finds many paths to truth. The wise recognize when paths meet rather than oppose. Grey Wolf reclaimed the conversation's direction, his demeanor solemn. Running Wolf, the council proposes this. Return with us to help our hunters find game before spring. Bring the medicine woman to treat our sick children. In exchange, your banishment ends completely. Here was the offer, simple, direct, addressing immediate tribal needs while offering full restoration of Samuel's position. Yet something in Grey Wolf's careful phrasing suggested awareness that circumstances had changed during exile. And after immediate needs are addressed, Samuel asked, "What then?" The three elders exchanged glances before two ravens spoke. "We observed the map you created together. We understand your thinking." The war chief's weathered face remained impassive, though his voice carried unexpected gentleness. "The ridge location you marked, it has good defensive position, adequate water, accessible hunting routes. A place between worlds," Spotted Fawn added, her gaze moving between Samuel and Irene. "Perhaps suitable for those who now belong to both." The implication was clear. The tribal leadership had considered not just Samuel's return, but the partnership he had formed with Irene. They were offering not merely emergency assistance, but potential ongoing arrangement that respected both tribal needs and personal attachments. Grey Wolf accepted the now prepared pipe from Hawk Feather. "Before formal discussion begins, we honor sacred tradition. The pipe opens truthful negotiation between parties." He looked to Irene. "Will the medicine woman participate in our custom?" Samuel translated the question, adding quietly, "Participation indicates willingness to consider their proposal with open heart." "You are not obligated." Irene straightened, her composed dignity matching that of the tribal elders. "I would be honored to participate in your tradition," she replied, the formal language reflecting appropriate respect for significant cultural exchange. Grey Wolf nodded approvingly, beginning the ceremonial pipelighting with practiced movements, while speaking traditional blessings in ancient Apache language even Samuel only partially understood. The aromatic smoke of sacred herbs, not tobacco but special blends reserved for major tribal decisions, soon filled the small cabin. As the pipe made its ceremonial circuit, first to two ravens, then Spotted Fawn, then Hawk Feather, Samuel watched Irene prepare herself for participation in this ritual entirely foreign to her scientific background. When the pipe finally reached her, she accepted it with dignified grace, following Samuel's subtle guidance on proper handling and ceremonial inhalation without betraying her novice status. Something shifted in the elders' collective demeanor as they witnessed her sincere participation, a subtle relaxing of judgment, an opening toward possibility. When the pipe completed its circuit with Grey Wolf's final blessing, the formal negotiation could truly begin. "We have proposal to offer," Samuel stated in Apache, then repeated in English for Irene's benefit, one that serves both immediate tribal needs and honors new circumstances. The elders leaned forward attentively as Samuel unrolled the map he and Irene had created together. Their separate futures now intertwined upon a single path neither had anticipated when autumn winds first brought an exiled warrior to a solitary healer's mountain door. Spring came early to the mountain that year. March winds carried hints of warmth rather than winter's customary final assault, and snow melt revealed patches of earth eager for sun's touch. On the ridge that Samuel and Irene had identified months earlier on their hand-drawn map, construction progressed on a sturdy cabin designed to withstand mountain seasons while serving as bridge between separate worlds. 2 months had passed since the elders' visit, and the agreement reached after careful negotiation. Samuel and Irene had returned with the delegation to the Apache village, bringing life-saving assistance during winter's harshest period. Samuel's hunting knowledge had located game herds that had shifted territories due to changing weather patterns, while Irene's medical expertise had treated the respiratory illness spreading among tribal children. Their reception in the village had varied. Some welcomed the returning exile and his unusual companion with open relief, while others maintained suspicious distance from the white woman and her foreign ways. Yet results spoke what words could not. When hunting parties returned with meat for empty cooking pots, when children's fevers broke under combined traditional and scientific treatments, even the most conservative tribal members acknowledged the value of this unprecedented partnership. Now, with immediate crises addressed, Samuel and Irene had returned to the mountains to establish their compromised dwelling, close enough to assist the tribe regularly, yet independent enough to continue Irene's botanical research and honor the unique bond they had formed during shared exile. On this particular morning, as dawn painted the eastern sky with pale gold promise, Samuel and Irene sat together on the partially constructed cabin's porch, sharing pine needle tea, as had become their custom. Below them, the valley stretched green with early spring growth. Above, eagles circled on thermal currents, their freedom a fitting metaphor for the path these unlikely partners had ultimately chosen. Between them on the rough-hewn bench lay an object they had spent weeks creating together, a medicine bundle of unique design, combining elements from both their traditions. The soft deerskin pouch, tanned using tribal methods but cut in scientific proportions, optimal for preservation, contained carefully selected contents. Samuel's eagle feather, received during his warrior initiation decades earlier. Irene's silver medical scissors that had accompanied her from university training through wilderness isolation. Herbs gathered using Apache knowledge, but categorized with Latinized but precision, and a page from Irene's research journal documenting successful treatment protocols, combining traditional and modern approaches. The children arrived tomorrow, Samuel noted, sipping his tea while gazing toward the valley where thin smoke rose from tribal fires. 5 students from the village, 3 from the settlement beyond. Irene nodded, satisfaction evident in her expression. Hawk feather selected well, those showing both intelligence and open-mindedness. The tribal healer's granddaughter shows particular promise. This represented perhaps the most significant aspect of their agreement with the tribal council, the establishment of a seasonal teaching exchange where young people from both cultures would receive instruction, combining indigenous wisdom with scientific methodology. Knowledge preserved not through academic exploitation or isolated tribal secrecy, but through practical application by a new generation who would carry both traditions forward. "Are you satisfied with our arrangement?" Samuel asked, the question encompassing far more than their teaching program. Irene considered this with characteristic thoughtfulness. Satisfied suggests completion. I prefer to think of our path as continuous development. Her hand moved to rest beside his on the bench between them, not quite touching yet unmistakably connected. But yes, I find this compromise brings unexpected fulfillment. Samuel nodded, understanding perfectly what remained unspoken. At their age, conventional romance would have been inappropriate to both their cultural backgrounds. Yet the partnership they had forged, first through necessity, then through mutual respect, finally, through genuine affection, provided companionship neither had anticipated experiencing again in their remaining years. 3 months earlier, in a private ceremony witnessed only by spotted fawn and hawk feather, they had formalized their partnership according to modified tribal tradition. No youthful promises of eternity, but practical vows of mutual support, knowledge exchange, and companion loyalty for whatever seasons remained in their lives. Samuel had braided a single strand of his silver-streaked black hair with Irene's gray-brown one, securing the braid within the medicine bundle that would eventually pass to their selected students. "The mountain lion still watches us," Samuel observed, nodding toward distant tracks visible in the remaining snow patches, though now with respectful distance rather than predatory intent. "We've earned our place in the hierarchy," Irene replied with subtle humor. "Neither prey nor competition," but established presence. Their gaze returned to the medicine bundle between them, physical manifestation of separate knowledge systems united through unlikely circumstance. Tomorrow would bring young minds eager for instruction, tribal elders, visiting to assess progress, settlement officials, reluctantly acknowledging the value of this unprecedented cultural exchange. But today belonged to them alone. The exiled warrior, who had never known a woman's kiss until silver touched both their hair, and the academic exile who had found scientific validation through traditional wisdom, rather than institutional approval. Samuel's hand finally moved the small distance to cover Irene's, the gesture comfortable now rather than tentative. Among Apache, it is said that every true path reveals itself only after one becomes lost. Irene's fingers intertwined with his, academic formality softened by months of shared existence. Science teaches similar principle. Breakthrough discoveries often emerge from unexpected experimental outcomes. Below them, spring continued reclaiming the valley from winter's grip. Above, eagles continued their timeless dance with wind and sky. Between them, the medicine bundle waited to begin its journey through generations yet unborn, carrying combined wisdom neither culture could have preserved alone. And within them both, the knowledge that banishment had ultimately led, not to isolation's slow death, but to life's unexpected renewal through partnership. Neither could have imagined when autumn winds first brought them together beneath the mountain's watchful gaze.